Section 14 of Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Corrie Samuel. Chapter 5, Part 2. So she stood mournfully at the drawing-room window, Bartholomew had so christened the library, dragged down by the weight of the crinoline which she had submissively adopted. It was heavier and more drab than any dress she had yet worn. None had ever so impeded her movements. No longer could she stride through the garden with her dogs, or run lightly to the high mound and fling herself beneath the oak tree. Her skirts collected damp leaves and straw. The plumed hat tossed on the breeze. The thin shoes were quickly soaked and mud-caked. Her muscles had lost their pliancy. She became nervous lest there should be robbers behind the wainscot, and afraid, for the first time in her life, of ghosts in the corridors. All these things inclined her, step by step, to submit to the new discovery, whether Queen Victoria's or another's, that each man and each woman has another allotted to it for life, whom it supports, by whom it is supported, till death do them part. It would be a comfort, she felt, to lean, to sit down, yes, to lie down, never, never, never to get up again. Thus did the spirit work upon her, for all her past pride, and as she came sloping down the scale of emotion to this lowly and unaccustomed lodging-place, those twangings and tinglings which had been so captious and so interrogative, modulated into the sweetest melodies, till it seemed as if angels were plucking harp-strings with white fingers, and her whole being was pervaded by a seraphic harmony. But whom could she lean upon? She asked that question of the wild autumn winds, for it was now October, and wet as usual. Not the Archduke. He had married a very great lady, and had hunted hares in Romania these many years now. Nor Mr. M. He was become a Catholic. Nor the Marquis of C. He made sacks in Botany Bay. Nor the Lord O. He had long been food for fishes. One way or another, all her old cronies were gone now, and the Nells and the Kits of Drury Lane, much though she favoured them, scarcely did to lean upon. Whom? She asked, casting her eyes upon the revolving clouds, clasping her hands as she knelt on the window-sill, and looking the very image of appealing womanhood as she did so. Can I lean upon? Her words formed themselves, her hands clasped themselves, involuntarily, just as her pen had written of its own accord. It was not Orlando who spoke, but the spirit of the age. But whichever it was, nobody answered it. The rooks were tumbling pell-mell among the violet clouds of autumn. The rain had stopped at last, and there was an iridescence in the sky which tempted her to put on her plumed hat and her little stringed shoes and stroll out before dinner. Everybody is mated except myself, she mused, as she trailed disconsolately across the courtyard. There were the rooks, Canute and Pippin even, transitory as their alliances were, still each this evening seemed to have a partner. Whereas I, who am mistress of it all, Orlando thought, glancing as she passed at the innumerable emblazoned windows of the hall, am single, am mateless, am alone. Such thoughts had never entered her head before. Now they bore her down unescapably. Instead of thrusting the gate open, she tapped with a gloved hand for the porter to unfasten it for her. One must lean on someone, she thought, if it is only on a porter, and half wished to stay behind and help him grill his chop on a bucket of fiery coals, but was too timid to ask it. So she strayed out into the park alone, faltering at first, and apprehensive lest there might be poachers or gamekeepers, or even errand-boys to marvel that a great lady should walk alone. At every step she glanced nervously, lest some male form should be hiding behind a furze bush, or some savage cow be lowering its horns to toss her. But there were only the rooks flaunting in the sky. A steel-blue plume from one of them fell among the heather. She loved wild birds' feathers. She had used to collect them as a boy. She picked it up and stuck it in her hat. The air blew upon her spirit somewhat and revived it. As the rooks went whirling and wheeling above her head, and feather after feather fell gleaming through the purplish air, she followed them, her long cloak floating behind her, over the moor, up the hill. She had not walked so far for years. 6 feathers had she picked from the grass and drawn between her fingers and pressed to her lips to feel their smooth, glinting plumage, when she saw, gleaming on the hillside, a silver pool, mysterious as the lake into which Sir Bedivere flung the sword of Arthur. A single feather quivered in the air and fell into the middle of it. Then some strange ecstasy came over her. Some wild notion she had of following the birds to the rim of the world, and flinging herself on the spongy turf, and there drinking forgetfulness, while the rook's hoarse laughter sounded over her. She quickened her pace. She ran. She tripped. The tough heather roots flung her to the ground. Her ankle was broken. She could not rise. But there she lay content. The scent of the bog myrtle and the meadow sweet was in her nostrils. The rook's hoarse laughter was in her ears. "I have found my mate," she murmured. "It is the moor. I am Nature's bride," she whispered, giving herself in rapture to the cold embraces of the grass, as she lay, folded in her cloak, in the hollow by the pool. "Here I will lie." A feather fell upon her brow. "I have found a greener laurel than the bay. My forehead will be cool always. These are wild birds' feathers, the owls, the nightjars. I shall dream wild dreams. My hands shall wear no wedding ring," she continued, slipping it from her finger. "The roots shall twine about them. Ah," she sighed, pressing her head luxuriously on its spongy pillow, "I have sought happiness through many ages and not found it, fame and missed it, love and not known it, life, and behold, death is better. I have known many men and many women," she continued, "none have I understood. It is better that I should lie at peace here with only the sky above me, as the gipsy told me years ago. That was in Turkey." And she looked straight up into the marvellous golden foam into which the clouds had churned themselves, and saw next moment a track in it, and camels passing in single file through the rocky desert among clouds of red dust. And then, when the camels had passed, there were only mountains, very high and full of clefts, and with pinnacles of rock, and she fancied she heard goat bells ringing in their passes, and in their folds were fields of irises and gentian. So the sky changed, and her eyes slowly lowered themselves down and down, till they came to the rain-darkened earth, and saw the great hump of the South Downs, flowing in one wave along the coast. And where the land parted, there was the sea with ships passing, and she fancied she heard a gun far out at sea, and thought at first, "That's the Armada," and then thought, "No, it's Nelson," and then remembered how those wars were over, and the ships were busy merchant ships, and the sails on the winding river were those of pleasure boats. She saw, too, cattle sprinkled on the dark fields, sheep and cows, and she saw the lights coming here and there in farmhouse windows, and lanterns moving among the cattle, as the shepherd went his rounds and the cowman. And then the lights went out, and the stars rose and tangled themselves about the sky. Indeed, she was falling asleep, with the wet feathers on her face, and her ear pressed to the ground, when she heard, deep within, some hammer on an anvil, or was it a heart beating? Tick-tock, tick-tock. So it hammered, so it beat, the anvil or the heart in the middle of the earth, until, as she listened, She thought it changed to the trot of a horse's hoofs. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted. Then she heard a stumble. Then, as it came nearer and nearer, she could hear the crack of a twig and the suck of the wet bog in its hoofs. The horse was almost on her. She sat upright. Towering dark against the yellow-slashed sky of dawn, with the plovers rising and falling about him, she saw a man on horseback. He started. The horse stopped. "Madam," the man cried, leaping to the ground, "you're hurt." "I'm dead, sir," she replied. A few minutes later they became engaged. The morning after, as they sat at breakfast, he told her his name. It was Marmaduke Bonthrop Shelmardine, Esquire. "I knew it," she said, for there was something romantic and chivalrous, passionate, melancholy yet determined about him, which went with the wild, dark-plumed name. A name which had, in her mind, the steel-blue gleam of rooks' wings, the hoarse laughter of their caws, the snake-like twisting descent of their feathers in a silver pool, and 1,000 other things which will be described presently. "Mine is Orlando," she said. He had guessed it. For if you see a ship in full sail coming with the sun on it, proudly sweeping across the Mediterranean from the South Seas, one says at once, "Orlando," he explained. In fact, though their acquaintance had been so short, they had guessed, as always happens between lovers, everything of any importance about each other in 2 seconds at the utmost, and it now remained only to fill in such unimportant details as what they were called, where they lived, or whether they were beggars or people of substance. He had a castle in the Hebrides, but it was ruined, he told her. Gannets feasted in the banqueting hall. He had been a soldier and a sailor, and had explored the East. He was on his way now to join his brig at Falmouth, but the wind had fallen, and it was only when the gale blew from the south-west that he could put out to sea. Orlando looked hastily from the breakfast-room window at the gilt leopard on the weather-vane. Mercifully its tail pointed due east, and was steady as a rock. "Oh, Shell, don't leave me!" she cried. "I'm passionately in love with you," she said. No sooner had the words left her mouth than an awful suspicion rushed into both their minds simultaneously. "You're a woman, Shell!" she cried. "You're a man, Orlando!" he cried. Never was there such a scene of protestation and demonstration as then took place since the world began. When it was over and they were seated again, she asked him, what was this talk of a south-west gale? Where was he bound for? "For the Horn," he said briefly, and blushed. For a man had to blush as a woman had, only at rather different things. It was only by dint of great pressure on her side, and the use of much intuition, that she gathered that his life was spent in the most desperate and splendid of adventures, which is to voyage round Cape Horn in the teeth of a gale. Masts had been snapped off, sails torn to ribbons. She had to drag the admission from him. Sometimes the ship had sunk, and he had been left the only survivor on a raft with a biscuit. "It's about all a fellow can do nowadays," he said sheepishly, and helped himself to great spoonfuls of strawberry jam. The vision which he had thereupon of this boy, for he was little more, sucking peppermints, for which he had a passion, while the masts snapped and the stars reeled, and he roared brief orders to cut this adrift, to heave that overboard, brought the tears to her eyes. Tears, she noted, of a finer flavour than any she had cried before. "I am a woman," she thought, "a real woman at last." She thanked Bonthrop from the bottom of her heart for having given her this rare and unexpected delight. Had she not been lame in the left foot, she would have sat upon his knee. "Shell, my darling," she began again, "tell me—" And so they talked 2 hours or more, perhaps about Cape Horn, perhaps not, and really it would profit little to write down what they said, for they knew each other so well that they could say anything, which is tantamount to saying nothing, or saying such stupid prosy things as how to cook an omelette, or where to buy the best boots in London, things which have no lustre taken from their setting, yet are positively of amazing beauty within it. For it has come about, by the wise economy of nature, that our modern spirit can almost dispense with language. The commonest expressions do, since no expressions do. Hence the most ordinary conversation is often the most poetic, and the most poetic is precisely that which cannot be written down. For which reasons we leave a great blank here, which must be taken to indicate that the space is filled to repletion. After some days more of this kind of talk, "Orlando, my dearest," Shell was beginning, when there was a scuffling outside, and Basket the butler entered with the information that there was a couple of peelers downstairs with a warrant from the Queen. "Show 'em up," said Shelmardine briefly, as if on his own quarter-deck, taking up, by instinct, a stand with his hands behind him in front of the fireplace. Two officers in bottle-green uniforms, with truncheons at their hips, then entered the room and stood at attention. Formalities being over, they gave into Orlando's own hands, as their commission was, a legal document of some very impressive sort, judging by the blobs of sealing-wax, the ribbons, the oaths, and the signatures, which were all of the highest importance. Orlando ran her eyes through it, and then, using the first finger of her right hand as pointer, read out the following facts as being most germane to the matter. "The lawsuits are settled," she read out. "Some in my favour, as for example, others not. Turkish marriage annulled. I was ambassador in Constantinople, Shell," she explained. "Children pronounced illegitimate. They said I had 3 sons by Pepita, a Spanish dancer, so they don't inherit, which is all to the good. Sex. Ah, what about sex? My sex," she read out with some solemnity, "is pronounced, indisputably, and beyond the shadow of a doubt. What was I telling you a moment ago, Shell? Female. The estates which are now desequestrated in perpetuity descend, undertailed and entailed, upon the heirs male of my body, or in default of marriage." But here she grew impatient with this legal verbiage, and said, "But there won't be any default of marriage, nor of heirs either, so the rest can be taken as read." Whereupon she appended her own signature beneath Lord Palmerston's, and entered from that moment into the undisturbed possession of her titles, her house, and her estate, which was now so much shrunk, for the cost of the lawsuits had been prodigious, that though she was infinitely noble again, she was also excessively poor. When the result of the lawsuit was made known, and rumour flew much quicker than the telegraph which has supplanted it, the whole town was filled with rejoicings. Horses were put into carriages for the sole purpose of being taken out. Empty barouches and landaus were trundled up and down the High Street incessantly. Addresses were read from the Bull, replies were made from the Stag, the town was illuminated, gold caskets were securely sealed in glass cases. Coins were well and duly laid under stones. Hospitals were founded. Rat and sparrow clubs were inaugurated. Turkish women by the dozen were burnt in effigy in the market-place, together with scores of peasant boys with the label, "I am a base pretender," lolling from their mouths. The Queen's cream-coloured ponies were soon seen trotting up the avenue with a command to Orlando to dine and sleep at the castle that very same night. Her table, as on a previous occasion, was snowed under with invitations from the Countess of R, Lady Q, Lady Palmerston, the Marchioness of P, Mrs. W. E. Gladstone, and others, beseeching the pleasure of her company, reminding her of ancient alliances between their family and her own, etc., all of which is properly enclosed in square brackets, as above, for the good reason that a parenthesis it was without any importance in Orlando's life. She skipped it to get on with the text. For when the bonfires were blazing in the market-place, she was in the dark woods with Shelmardine alone. So fine was the weather that the trees stretched their branches motionless above them, and if a leaf fell, it fell spotted red and gold, so slowly that one could watch it for half an hour fluttering and falling, till it came to rest at last on Orlando's foot. "Tell me, Ma," she would say, and here it must be explained that when she called him by the first syllable of his first name, she was in a dreamy, amorous, acquiescent mood, domestic, languid a little, as if spiced logs were burning, and it was evening, not yet time to dress, and a thought, wet perhaps outside, enough to make the leaves glisten, but a nightingale might be singing even so among the azaleas, 2 or 3 dogs barking at distant farms, a cock crowing, all of which the reader should imagine in her voice. "Tell me, Ma," she would say, "about Cape Horn." Then Shelmardine would make a little model on the ground of the Cape, with twigs and dead leaves, and an empty snail shell or 2. "Here's the north," he would say. "There's the south. The wind's coming from hereabouts. Now the brig is sailing due west. We've just lowered the top boom mizzen, and so, you see, here, where this bit of grass is, she enters the current, which you'll find marked. Where's my map and compasses, bo'sun? Ah, thanks, that'll do, where the snail shell is. The current catches her on the starboard side, so we must rig the jib boom, or we shall be carried to the larboard, which is where that beech leaf is. For you must understand, my dear." And so he would go on, and she would listen to every word, interpreting them rightly, so as to see, that is to say, without his having to tell her, the phosphorescence on the waves, the icicles clanking in the shrouds, how he went to the top of the mast in a gale, there reflected on the destiny of man, came down again, had a whisky and soda, went on shore, was trapped by a black woman, repented, reasoned it out, read Pascal, determined to write philosophy, bought a monkey, debated the true end of life, decided in favour of Cape Horn, and so on. All this and 1,000 other things she understood him to say, and so when she replied, "Yes, negresses are seductive, aren't they?" he having told her that the supply of biscuits now gave out, he was surprised and delighted to find how well she had taken his meaning. "Are you positive you aren't a man?" he would ask anxiously, and she would echo, "Can it be possible you're not a woman?" And then they must put it to the proof without more ado. For each was so surprised at the quickness of the other's sympathy, and it was to each such a revelation that a woman could be as tolerant and free-spoken as a man, and a man as strange and subtle as a woman, that they had to put the matter to the proof at once. And so they would go on talking, or rather understanding, which has become the main art of speech in an age where words are growing daily so scanty in comparison with ideas that "the biscuits ran out" has to stand for kissing a negress in the dark, when one has read Bishop Berkeley's philosophy for the 10th time. And from this it follows that only the most profound masters of style can tell the truth, and when one meets a simple one-syllable writer, one may conclude, without any doubt at all, that the poor man is lying. So they would talk, and then, when her feet were fairly covered with spotted autumn leaves, Orlando would rise and stroll away into the heart of the woods in solitude, leaving Bonthrop sitting there among the snail shells, making models of Cape Horn. "Bonthrop," she would say, "I'm off." And when she called him by his second name, Bonthrop, it should signify to the reader that she was in a solitary mood, felt them both as specks on a desert, was desirous only of meeting death by herself, for people die daily, die at dinner-tables, or like this, out of doors in the autumn woods, and with the bonfires blazing, and Lady Palmerston or Lady Derby asking her out every night to dinner, the desire for death would overcome her, and so saying, "Bonthrop," she said, in effect, "I'm dead," and pushed her way as a spirit might through the spectre-pale beech-trees, and so awed herself deep into solitude, as if the little flicker of noise and movement were over, and she were free now to take her way. All of which the reader should hear in her voice when she said "Bonthrop," and should also add, the better to illumine the word, that for him too the same word signified, mystically, separation and isolation, and the disembodied pacing the deck of his brig in unfathomable seas. After some hours of death, suddenly a jay shrieked, "Shelmardine!" and stooping, she picked up one of those autumn crocuses which to some people signify that very word, and put it with a jay's feather that came tumbling blue through the beech woods in her breast. Then she called, "Shelmardine!" and the word went shooting this way and that through the woods, and struck him where he sat, making models out of snail shells in the grass. He saw her, and heard her coming to him, with the crocus and the jay's feather in her breast, and cried, "Orlando!" which meant, and it must be remembered that when bright colours like blue and yellow mix themselves in our eyes, some of it rubs off on our thoughts. First, the bowing and swaying of bracken as if something were breaking through, which proved to be a ship in full sail, heaving and tossing a little dreamily, rather as if she had a whole year of summer days to make her voyage in, and so the ship bears down, heaving this way, heaving that way, nobly, indolently, and rides over the crest of this wave and sinks into the hollow of that one, and so suddenly stands over you, who are in a little cockle-shell of a boat looking up at her, with all her sails quivering, and then, behold, they drop all of a heap on deck, as Orlando dropped now into the grass beside him. 8 or 9 days had been spent thus, but on the 10th, which was the 26th of October, Orlando was lying in the bracken, while Shelmardine recited Shelley, whose entire works he had by heart, when a leaf, which had started to fall slowly enough from a tree-top, whipped briskly across Orlando's foot. A second leaf followed, and then a third. Orlando shivered and turned pale. It was the wind. Shelmardine, but it would be more proper now to call him Bonthrop, leapt to his feet. "The wind!" he cried. Together they ran through the woods, the wind plastering them with leaves as they ran, to the great court, and through it, and the little courts, frightened servants leaving their brooms and their saucepans to follow after, till they reached the chapel, and there a scattering of lights was lit as fast as could be, one knocking over this bench, another snuffing out that taper. Bells were rung, people were summoned. At length there was Mr. Dupper, catching at the ends of his white tie and asking where was the prayer-book. And they thrust Queen Mary's prayer-book in his hands, and he searched, hastily fluttering the pages, and said, "Marmaduke, Bonthrop, Shelmardine, and Lady Orlando, kneel down." And they knelt down, and now they were bright, and now they were dark, as the light and shadow came flying helter-skelter through the painted windows, and among the banging of innumerable doors, and a sound like brass pots beating, the organ sounded, its growl coming loud and faint alternately, and Mr. Dupper, who was grown a very old man, tried now to raise his voice above the uproar, and could not be heard, and then all was quiet for a moment, and one word, it might be, the jaws of death, rang out clear, while all the estate servants kept pressing in with rakes and whips still in their hands to listen. And some sang loud, and others prayed, and now a bird was dashed against the pane, and now there was a clap of thunder, so that no one heard the word obey spoken, or saw, except as a golden flash, the ring pass from hand to hand. All was movement and confusion. And up they rose with the organ booming and the lightning playing and the rain pouring, and the Lady Orlando, with her ring on her finger, went out into the court in her thin dress, and held the swinging stirrup, for the horse was bitted and bridled, and the foam was still on his flank, for her husband to mount, which he did with one bound, and the horse leapt forward, and Orlando, standing there, cried out, "Marmaduke, Bonthrop, Shelmardine!" and he answered her, "Orlando!" and the words went dashing and circling like wild hawks together among the belfries, and higher, further and further, faster and faster they circled, till they crashed and fell in a shower of fragments to the ground, and she went in. End of section 14.